Welcome, everyone. I hope you had nice lunch. That was tasty. Let me just do a quick check. How many of you were here for Dr. Eiler's presentation? Great. Well, then I can introduce this audience to our panel very easily. This is the elephants in the room. Actually, I'm really glad to have this opportunity to facilitate this discussion. And as we heard in the agritourism presentation, in the Visit California presentation, Dr. Eiler's presentation, cannabis and cannabis tourism came up fairly regularly. And it was a great setup for this panel of experts who have been deeply involved in that. So we heard a lot of people talking about it, but you noticed even when I asked the question, it had been on the very surface, and these are folks that are right in the middle of it. So I'm really looking forward to them being able to share information with you as we go. So my role in this, I am on the Trinity County Board of Supervisors, and one of the big reasons I got involved was about economic development. And I grew up kind of in the tourism and hospitality industry, and so this all kind of comes together for me. Trinity County is now, we're at about 350 plus active cannabis farmers in the county. And we have definitely had a roller coaster ride, as was covered in the article that we have in the program. But we're at the healthiest place we've been in a while, even if the industry is not. And so we're now excited to be looking at those opportunities to leverage something that is already there and, if not thriving, at least surviving better than it has in a little bit. And so we have a great panel here that I just wanted to do a quick introduction for. So first, starting on the end, Laura Lasser is here, and she is going to be representing the Southern Humboldt Business and Visitors Bureau. Dana Hauser, I skipped one over there, but she's the president of the Hayfork Chamber and also involved in the cannabis cultivation and beyond. Adrian Keys is after many years as the president, he's also the executive director of the Trinity County Agriculture Alliance, very active in a number of ways in the industry. And then Brian Applegarth, principal consultant for Applegarth Strategies, is here, and he actually is going to set the stage really well for us by giving about a 10-minute presentation that will help us all get a little bit more grounded in the details of what we're talking about, and then we'll have some good Q&A and hopefully some time for good questions from you guys as well. So Brian has been involved in this. I don't know if it's fair to say, Brian, but I keep telling people about you and say, well, he's kind of like the godfather of cannabis tourism. But he's been involved in this for a long, long time, and he has award-winning destination consultant specialized in cannabis tourism. I know from our discussions he's going beyond that in terms of tourism, but this has been a key focus. He co-authored the longest-running national study of the active leisure cannabis travel audience in the United States. And he also helps destinations harness cannabis tourism to grow the visitor economy. His pioneer work has been recognized by U.S. Travel Awards, the Visit California Poppy Awards, and Condé Nast Bright Ideas in Travel. Those are all pretty big names. So welcome the panel. Brian, why don't you start us off?
Thanks, Rick. And thank you all for being here. What an honor to speak on this. Thank you for including this topic. It's been an incredible 2 days, just like really blown away by the programming. So I'm going to do a quick, again, 10-minute setting the table for the discussion. I've learned over the years that getting some of the data, the case studies, and the facts laid out so we could have educated discussions is part of the key to this. So with that, let's just jump into the next slide. What is cannabis travel? That's what we're going to talk about. Next. Okay, the important first slide. So cannabis and hemp tourism is a travel trend today that's grounded in wellness and well-being, with 1 foot in medical travel, 1 foot in leisure travel. And that's important to understand because wellness tourism, if you look at the projections of how that's going to grow, it's exponential. And cannabis and hemp, from a sustainability point of view, are incredible toolkits, whether it's hempcrete, whether it's CBD massages and spa, or whether it is different kinds of ingestion or imbibement with cannabis and hemp. So understanding that we have an endocannabinoid system, which is basically like your skeletal system, your immune system. We have a system inside of our bodies, all of us, our dogs, our pets, and this system has receptors throughout your whole body. And these receptors work directly with the therapeutic compounds that are found in cannabis and hemp. And the primary function of the endocannabinoid system is to bring your body back into balance or homeostasis. Now, the cannabis and hemp plant, totally aside, we internally produce 2 endogenous cannabinoids that work with this system. And when you take the cannabis and plant, topically, beverage, smoking a joint, you put more cannabinoids in your body that work directly with these receptors, and the primary function is to bring your body back into balance or homeostasis. So when we say it's a travel trend grounded in wellness and well-being, it's based on biology and the principles of the plant. Another way that this shows up is hemp was used to remediate soil from different, whether it's Chernobyl, they planted hemp plants because it's a bioaccumulator. It cleaned the soil. It brought it back into balance. So when you think of cannabis and hemp tourism, think of balance, think of wellness and well-being. Next slide. All right, a really interesting part of this travel trend, the wellness, of course, but the well-being is really interesting because with cannabis, you're dealing with what we call an entheogenic altered state, whether it's mild like a microdose, or whether it's a medium effect, or whether it's something that's stronger, right? So you have this new kind of altered state that is a small part, but a really important part of this cannabis travel trend. This isn't on the hemp side in California. This is the cannabis travel trend side. And these words, mindset and setting intention, flow state, which is also similar to a runner's high or being in the zone when you're playing basketball. It's being incredibly present. It's being completely immersed in the activity or experience that you're experiencing. So an entheogenic altered state has a relationship with time and space, which is very different than the altered state you get from alcohol. The concept of journeying, integration is really important when you're using entheogenic products, which traditionally, if you look at the history of cannabis and entheogens and THC, it was used as a tool to connect with the divine, and it was a spiritual health thing. So it's interesting because there's going to be a new vertical, I believe, emerging in tourism when it comes to the THC side that really leans into this well-being concept of spiritual health. And then after that is how do you integrate the discoveries or the learnings that are part of this very unique altered state. And then, of course, the transformation, the quality of life that could come from that experience. Next slide. Let's talk numbers. Okay, we got an economic development group here, so let's move into the numbers. So in 2022, this is a little dated, but this is the only infographic I have on this at the United States level. For every dollar spent in a cannabis retail shop, $2.80 is injected into the local economy. Now, this is speaking to the power of the cannabis tourism spend. So when you have travelers come in town, spend $1, an additional $2.80 goes into restaurants, arts and culture, culinary, things like this. So cannabis can be an economic driver. Back in 2022, cannabis travel was valued at a $17 billion industry. And that was without even acknowledging kind of the hemp sector, the wellness, the hotel CBD massages. So the data is still getting organized and categorized correctly, but this was back in 2022, making the economic case with the multiplier spend for every dollar spent in a cannabis retail shop. Next slide. All right, I wanted to share 2 case studies of my work. I've done work for economic development departments as well as destination marketing organizations and chambers of commerce. This is a body of work I did with the city of Desert Hot Springs, which is basically focused around developing the experience economy, right? So they were very aggressive when they licensed the cannabis supply chain. They have a handful of shops, but how do they evolve in the Coachella Valley, which has a tourism industry of $8 billion a year? How do they evolve to serve visitors that come in high volume to Palm Springs and the Coachella Valley? So with the Economic Development Department, did a destination assessment. And some of the key parts to consider for everyone in this room as you kind of navigate the experience economy development is it needs to be enabling. You need to allow the people that have intellectual capital that are part of your community to be encouraged and incentivized to manifest this into a tourism product for the experience economy, not a commodity, not a product, not even a service, which is time saved. We're talking the experience economy, time well spent. Multiple revenue streams unlocked over a 90-minute duration or longer, right? So how do you enable experience economy development with your specific destination. You need to understand your source market and what are you a source for when it comes to intellectual capital. Are you a cultivation region? Do you have a lot of lounges like West Hollywood that have, you know, all kinds of experiences these days? They're crushing it with the lounge scene down there. Are you more of a manufacturing hub and can have the first Coors factory or Jelly Belly factory tour? And as you develop your supply chain, recognizing your intellectual capital, how are you enabling that experience economy to come forward so you can become and integrate tourism in a really brand-aligned way? You know, hence what Lynn was saying earlier with all the work that Visit California does on the psychographics and the different trip motivators. Next slide. Visit Oakland. So this is a destination marketing organization. Visit Oakland, you know, we have the cannabis trail that I've been building since 2015. Visit Oakland took that and expanded it. They wanted to include arts and culture and restaurants and hotel partners. So we took the cultural cannabis trail, which runs through 9 counties in Northern California. We focused on the 3 cultural landmarks in Oakland, and we expanded that product to become an experiential product. And then you had the Oakland Cannabis Trail, which was like a blown out version, using these cultural landmarks as anchors in cultural storytelling, which has a lot to do with obviously the community there and how they were impacted by the war on drugs and what that meant for their community. And acknowledging the cultural history of Oakland as a California story, and then building it into more of a modern day, how do you use cannabis and travel about to enhance experiences, engage in arts and culture, but integrate cannabis so it's not off to the side in a silo. It's part of your community. You have residents that work there. You have people paying taxes. So social inclusion is really important. Oakland really led the way on this in a lot of ways. We did get recognized by U.S. Travel in 2023 with the ESTO Awards being a finalist, which was a big moment. That was for the campaign we did, which was this 420, Choose Equity, an excellent example of intersectionality around a campaign. For the 420 Cannabis Holiday, we leaned into the equity licensed and owned shops, which is a part of the cannabis industry, and we elevated those stories because it's on brand with Oakland's brand, and it got a lot of recognition in the tourism industry. Next slide. All right. The new data. So I've been working with MMGY Travel Intelligence since 2019, measuring the cannabis-motivated travel audience in the US, which continues to grow and continues to evolve as information flows out, more states legalize, more countries legalize, more hotels adopt hemp products and CBD massages, things like that. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of the data that we got this year in 2025. Next slide. All right, 39% of the active leisure travelers in the US qualify as cannabis-motivated visitors. What does this mean? It means they want to have at least one cannabis-related experience while on vacation. How many Americans is that? Between 70 million and 75 million Americans. When they're looking at destinations, they want to have a cannabis experience on their itinerary. The different kind of percentage generationally you can see up here. Gen Zers are very strong, as are millennials. Gen Xers, of course, and then boomers have interest in how cannabis can improve their quality of life. They take 4.1 leisure trips per year, and that's their average spend. Now, behind this data, there's 3 segments. There's the canna-curious traveler, the cannabis wellness traveler, and the cannabis connoisseur. And each of those have different trip motivators. Just like how Visit California looks at it, there's different experiences that entice those demographics. Not all of them smoke. So understanding these audience and the niches and how they spend and what you can uplift that's aligned with your destination brand is all an opportunity today. And I'm saying the most obvious thing is that the North Coast region and the Emerald Triangle have an incredible opportunity in the next 10 years, 5 years now, to be able to become the most compelling experience hub for cannabis on Earth. I mean, you can compete with Amsterdam. You're the rural kind of farm, authentic legacy back to the land, incredible genetics banks. There's so much intellectual capital and assets to leverage in a data-driven way. Next slide. Okay, so we always look at what are across the whole audience, the 70, 75 million, the 39%. Oh, by the way, last year was 34%. It grew 5% in 1 year. That's how fast this audience is growing. As far as the trip motivators, visiting a cannabis shop has been at the top of the list since we started this study in 2020. So that's just like everyone's curious, they want to see a cannabis shop, great. I talked to a cannabis shop in Las Vegas who 30+% of their visitors don't buy anything. They come in and get a selfie and like, how are you guys not selling a t-shirt? Like, figure out how to monetize that versus just say, oh, they didn't buy weed from us, we lost. Like, there's a way when you have the time and attention to unlock revenue, but you got to think in terms of the experience economy and not the transactional product economy. Number 2, visiting a cannabis sampling room. Not tasting, sampling. Sampling's more accurate for cannabis because it's effect-driven. Yes, you have taste as well and the art of taking a dry hit, which gives you the terpene profiles and things like this. But cannabis also has this really special thing of, well, what are you feeling? Like, what's the effects? Or is it stimulating your appetite? Is it accentuating colors and shapes and making an art experience more compelling? Or is it bringing you into the present moment for a nature walk in the Redwoods where you feel incredibly connected to your surroundings? So it's an enhancement tool. So how do you do a curated experience that is a sampling, tasting, pairing experience? Number 2 activity that's going to entice visitation. Number 3, visiting a cannabis farm. Obvious opportunity for the North Coast and the Emerald Triangle regions. Number 5, I'm going to jump down to, curious about the therapeutic effects and medicinal effects and how it can improve their quality of life. This is where you start getting into that wellness, that medical. So this is where cannabis is really going to start shining, and hemp, as a wellness travel trend, and this region can lead that storytelling in the mainstream experience economy. Next slide. So now let's talk about experiences that enhance, right? That altered state, that entheogenic altered state that's very different from alcohol inebriation. 36% want to feel a mildly intoxicating effect. Not medium, not heavy, mild. So that shows that this microdose, low dose, there's curiosity there from this audience of what does it feel like to be slightly altered, and how does that add to my vacation or my travels. Number 2, experience cannabis effects that complement and enhance experiences like mural walks and theater and art. This is the data-driven dotted line where cannabis should not be in a silo. It's part of your community. So how do you start connecting the dots in a data-driven way that tells travel stories, that prioritizes public safety and hospitality frontline staff safety with training to be able to provide a guest experience in a really empowered way that adds to your destination and is in line with your brand and authentically part of your community. You'll see the one below it is experience or complement food experiences or fine dining or a local signature dish. You know, the munchies was one narrative. That became a medical application during the HIV/AIDS epidemic to survive. Cannabis stimulated appetite, saved a lot of people. Today, I believe cannabis is the new vermouth. Approached the right way with a beverage or a joint, it could stimulate your appetite, accentuate your palate, flavor, taste, and texture before you go to your Michelin star meal. That's going to be one of the highlights of your trip. So how do you start integrating these different cannabis varietals and cultivars that have specific effects that can enhance the rest of the destination in an integrated way? And you'll see down here, you also have nature experiences and a little bit more data. Next slide. And then this one's all about hotels, right? Hotels. We know that we talked a lot about hotels today. Believe me, I've worked for 25 different destinations. Heads and beds matter. Visitation volumes matter. Length of stay matters. Here's some information. So if your hotels don't understand it, there's an opportunity to look at some real data over 5 years and to let them start wrapping their head around what this audience is and what will incentivize room nights if they start understanding and catering to this evolving and growing cannabis-motivated travel audience. Next slide. This is the second to last slide, I believe. So I ran the Cannabis and Hemp Task Force for the California Travel Association as well as Destinations International. And I really do subscribe to what they call their community vitality wheel, specifically the areas of place stewardship, brand management, and investment. And this all kind of leads into foundational investments of what is the gold standard, right? What is the gold standard? Looking at economic development case studies, the audience data, the DMO case studies, understanding cannabis as a tool for wellness and well-being. And I listed 3 here that kind of top of mind. stakeholder study sessions, get the conversation current. Bring the audience data, bring the case studies, bring the facts, so then you can get the stakeholders around a table and start making coordinated strategy to integrate this and grow it. Number 2, market assessment. This is usually a next step in my work, is understanding what exists. What's in the experience economy today, and what does that mean for our destination? Where are our strengths, our authentic strengths? And then the sub-brand development, understanding how to look at it from a place of source brand, an experience economy brand, and then a tourism brand. And how do those interplay for your destination? Next slide. Sorry, Rick.
No, you're fine.
Next slide. Yeah, I'm Brian. Thank you for the time.
No, you're good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, as you can see, that really, I think, for a lot of people helps ground us in a lot more information than we had coming into this discussion. And so what we want to do is dig a little deeper. And so in the next slide, we'll start to better introduce the team. So I briefly did this, but Adrian Keys, currently Executive Director of the Trinity County Agricultural Alliance. And he is representing licensed cultivators dedicated to responsible, sustainable cannabis farming. And I can tell you from working from the county government role and working with the cannabis industry, Adrian has played a huge role in helping me better understand the industry and how the decisions that we're making in the board room can affect that industry. He advocates for growers navigating regulatory challenges and works to elevate Trinity County's cannabis reputation while supporting economic resilience through stewardship and community. Dana Hauser. Dana is the president of Hayfork Chamber of Commerce. She's been doing some very fun things. She leads the Hayfork Chamber and serves as the manager of Hayfork Cannabis Company, LLC. She spearheaded the Adventure Grows in Hayfork initiative, the world's first cannabis-forward destination brand. It celebrates Hayfork's heritage through regenerative cannabis farming, local culture, and rural tourism. And Brian, Dana, one of you can say, but when you guys were telling me a little bit about this, it was the first time that the cannabis leaf had been in a logo for tourism. Is that what it was, or just
For a destination.
for a destination?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Laura Lassiter, Executive Director, Southern Humboldt Business and Visitor Bureau. Laura is where she champions sustainable tourism and integrates cannabis experiences into destination marketing. A founding board member, she works to strengthen local businesses, highlight Humboldt's cultural heritage, and position the region as a premier travel destination. So you can see we have a wealth of knowledge up here. And again, I have some questions that I'm prepared to ask, and if you have some as well, we'll come out to you. And let me just get started. So Brian, you've worked with destinations across the U.S. and beyond. Based on that experience, what are the most successful ways rural regions have incorporated cannabis into their tourism economies? So take it from all of this worldwide work that you've done, but what does it mean to here?
Yeah, I mean, it really does start kind of with that, with the stakeholder study session. It's getting the conversation current and then creating strategy from there. I've had clients that want to jump straight to marketing, and it usually is, it still works and it still makes sense, and sometimes, but it's also, you're not setting the foundation in the right way, in my opinion. So the best work that I've seen for a rural destination is investing in getting the conversation current, getting stakeholders on a table, answering questions, bringing the data, and then grounding it in strategy in relationship to the destination's strategic plan and the brand guidelines. So everyone's kind of singing off the same song sheet, so to speak. Honestly, Hayfork and the work that Dana and the Chamber did is, I think, one of the bravest and smartest moves is, I mean, it's the equivalent to the first wine brand that had grapes in Napa, right? So Hayfork in the Emerald Triangle, you know, now has the first kind of brand that includes this image that I think is going to go down as a piece of history as this grows. And that kind of first mover real estate, I think, will pay off dividends as this matures. And I think the third one I'll mention is Santa Cruz County. So not super rural, but it's a rural part of Santa Cruz, and it's ag. You know, this summer in June, July, they are going to have the first 2 on-farm cannabis sampling rooms where people can come, buy, sample, look at the farms, the goats, the sheeps, and And yeah, so that's that's another strategy that I see that's really groundbreaking.
Okay, thank you. Laura, is there anything from your work that you would like to weigh in on that's to that question, kind of what you've seen work and not work in our area?
Well, I guess I would have to say it's still we're still trying to figure that out. Deliverables are really tough right now. I would have to say if you're coming to the table first and you want to, how can we have a cannabis experience in our community, in our county? It's we all have great ideas and this would be wonderful, but logistically, are things possible? And that is a lot of what we have found was, we have farmers that have wanted to transition into tourism along with their cultivating, but what we found that has made them successful throughout the generations and decades, and even through primarily through the outlaw period of being very remote, very micro areas throughout primarily southern Humboldt, is logistically very challenging to bring them into the mainstream tourism. So we're still figuring that out.
Okay. And Adrian, Dana, maybe you can weigh into that a little bit, because I know you've been thinking about this from a Trinity County perspective. And I seem to remember when I was having a conversation, you were saying, well, it might be 1 or 2% of the farms that actually become the visited farms or the visited locations, but that doesn't mean it can't have a broad impact on the whole economic impact. So one of you want to speak into that a little bit more?
Yeah, thanks. I think that having farm tours, there's only a small percentage of farms that are appropriate for farm tours. And I don't even have that mapped out. I just understand that on a broader level. But farm tours in a region will still benefit farms that aren't touring for brand recognition at retail. That's so it affects, you have something to offer to heighten the experience and come and have a staycation at my home, say, where you can disconnect and put, your world can melt away. And then you can remember that, go home, and then the region has that impact. And that's, as I'm visioning how this is going to affect my community and my industry, I'm thinking on that level. Not just, immediate transaction once. It's it's a whole vision, with affecting all these different areas, and then the impression lasting to increase. And then it all comes down to brand recognition of place, which is Trinity County, Emerald Triangle, craft weed. And then you'll always seek out, if you can't find Emerald Triangle weed, you'll find craft somewhere else. But anyway, sorry, thanks.
Got it. Thank you. And Brian, I know you already mentioned a little bit about demographics, and so what would you say about which are the most interested that you think apply to our North Coast region? So you talked about the different age groups and different, all kinds of things, but tie that back specifically here.
Yeah, I think so there's 3 segments, like I mentioned, the Canna Curious, Canna Wellness, and the Cannabis Connoisseur Traveler. There's 3 different travel segments under the cannabis motivated travel audience in the U.S. I believe that there's 2. I think the connoisseur is the obvious one. This is the segment that gets nerdy about varietals, probably smokes, uses concentrates and hash, and they get really nerdy about what the chemistry is and the therapeutic compounds in each cultivar, the taste, the flavors, the effects. So I think considering the genetics bank that exists in the Emerald Triangle and in the North Coast, you guys you have all the assets you need in an authentic way and the intellectual capital to really grow that audience. And they're also the most low-hanging fruit. These are people that want to go on a cannabis vacation, not have one experience while on vacation that's cannabis related. So I think the connoisseur would be where I'd focus a lot of attention and time and resources. The other one I think that is something to not be left out is the wellness traveler. Of course, because of the culture of the redwoods and the rivers and nature and all the wellness aspects of that. But also there's this whole community of healers that I've met throughout the region that is holistic healing in different ways. And I think that that is an incredible intellectual capital product that goes hand in hand with kind of earth-based medicines and natural healing. And that kind of harkens back to the wellness and well-being vertical. So I see those two things really going hand in hand with, you know, if you want the fastest dollars, the quickest, the connoisseur, but don't leave what maybe is the bigger play long-term and more mainstream, which is the wellness and well-being traveler.
Thank you. You know, one of the things Dana mentioned about like the branding and the huge impact of that, and Adrian, I think I'm going to hit you up with a surprise question here, but you sort of introduced me to this big study that was going on about legacy genetics, and I participated a little bit on the peripheral in that, and which has been fascinating. But can you help the audience a little bit better understand what is going on there, and why is it so important, and how will it eventually play into this?
Certainly, Rick, and I'm sure glad that you were able to attend. I think it was really meaningful, and I wish that we could do it again and have even greater attendance. A large part of that, it's both the intellectual property of the cultivators, like looking back historically at other crops, and wine is often brought up, although there's parallels, but they're not exactly the same, is regional varietals. You know, everybody knows Burgundy and Pinot Noir from Burgundy and all these different things, but then if you go down to the next level, there's, you know, little pockets in Eastern Europe that have their own grapes that are part of this culture that you will never be able to buy that wine in a store. You would literally, if you want to try that vintage and those grapes, you need to actually go and visit there. And so I've done a lot of, I grew up in restaurants and I grew up in a lot of different tourist towns. And so I've seen how geography and experience interrelate in those elements. And so I think the legacy cannabis genetics has to do with that. It also has to do with as a placeholder in time as we're going through this transition in we're going to see some industrialism of the cannabis industry. We already are. And a lot of these little refined bits and pieces are going to get lost. And those are the key elements for the North State. And so in some ways, in the legacy genetics project, it's exposing the recipients, the consumers of the data at the end of the day, to these pockets, to these select little villages, to these little regions that are tucked away in the hills and have their own genetic lines that they've built there over time, that are tied through culture and through human activity and through environment directly to that piece of land. And that's kind of where like the AVA program in wine and cannabis, there's the opportunity to develop an appellation of origin soon. The regulations are coming. It's been a long time coming, but they're coming. And studies like the legacy cannabis genetics will help reinforce those, and that becomes a key component to marketing your region to consumers, to wellness enthusiasts, and to the canna curious, because that is the piece. That's the thing that makes it so unique and interesting. And it's the piece that can't be reproduced. It's yours or ours. And so I would hope to see that as one of the inflorescences of that work, is that it gives the value and holds the value in the land and in those communities in kind of a communally owned fashion, so that it's insulated against I don't even quite know how to say, insulated against being lost and being exploited. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think Laura, Dana, just to tee you up a little bit on this one. So one of you's been working at it and identifies the struggle, and one's just kind of trying to get it off the ground. But if a county or community in the North Coast wanted to take its first step toward developing canna tourism, what's the easiest, lowest cost starting point?
Wow, I would say it doesn't, the costs are minimal to identify who your partners are. And like I stated before, is it logistically possible to even do this? And then, you know, there's not a one-stop shop for California, and specifically in our regions, it varies between Mendocino and Humboldt and Trinity. And so working with your county partners to see, you know, can we do this? You know, reaching out to building and planning and, you know, what is it going to take to get to this? And that's really the cost is going to be minimal, but the impacts are make it or break it type of thing. You don't want to invest a lot and then find out it's not even feasible. And we've seen that, and a lot of it has been, with our county partners, this has been something new for all of us, and it's been, well, we ask the question, can we do this, can we do that? And our county partners have been, I don't know, let us figure it out. We don't know, so let us get back to you. And so that the cost is really minimal there.
Okay. Did you want to add anything?
I will say that I have many hats, and one of the hats, I work in the cannabis division for Trinity County under the equity funds on a very part-time basis, and I'm the Chamber of Commerce president, and I'm on the board of Trinity County Agriculture Alliance, and I'm myself a cultivator. So I want to think about this for my own businesses, for my community, for my broader community, and for the whole county and region. So one of the things I want to make available is resources and information so people can make their own choices to diversify their business. That's up to them. That's not up to the government. That's not up to our trade organization, not up to the Chamber of Commerce. It's up to individual oomph or whatever. So, and individual ingenuity, and what people want to take on. So it's like, okay, so if we're going to do farm tours, where are they going to stay? Are they going to stay on your farm? Can they stay on your farm? And I'm like, oh, I go to my boss at the county, I go, I got this great idea, farm tours and farm stays. And he's like, can people even legally tour a farm? And I'm, yes, of course they can. He's like, really? I'm like, well, yeah, Drew. And then I say, why? And he's like, huh. And then I'm like, well, and farm stays. And he's like, camping? People can't camp on it. People can't camp. I'm like, but what if they have bathrooms? Because you have to have bathrooms to have a farm and da-da-da-da-da. He's like, we'll see. Get back to me next week. Do some research, get back to me. I'm like, okay. Because I definitely can't present a solution to people that then the county's going to be like, you can't even do that. And if you do it, you're going to have to do this, and then be taxed on your property. Like, I don't want to give a solution that's a bigger problem. So I'm working through the process, through our general plan update that's gonna, news to you, gonna allow camping on certain zoned properties without a director's use permit. Because I'm sure you all know about director's use permits. Har har. So anyway, I'm thinking about it live from the seat of a cultivator, an entrepreneur, like I can't help it. And then in these volunteer roles that I'm doing, because it's my survival, and I refuse to stop climbing. And so it's making what I want to provide to our farmers in Trinity County, and then our partners in the Emerald Triangle, and our partners in the craft regions, as like a list of opportunities, things to take advantage of, and it's up to you to figure out, but create pathways through policy. I can't even believe I'm saying this stuff, but it's true. So making pathways to be able, because who regulates tent and camping is, any sort of camping, is HCD. It's not even the county. So the county gives you authorization, and then you have, but like, what's that cusp? Like, so basically looking for legal workarounds, however you can say that, like still working within the process of it being permissible, not wanting to put people in situations where they have to cross gray lines or anything. That is not my goal. My goal is to have clear legal pathways at these things, but making those resources available. Okay. There we go.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask one last question, then I think if you have some. So what are the biggest misconceptions about cannatourism, and how can local leaders in any field help reframe that narrative? So why don't you guys, whoever wants to take that, and then we'll come back with questions.
I would just say, I would start at the misconception of a cultivator.
Right. Yeah, I will start there. The misconception of a cultivator, coming from, however many years of prohibition into the light. I myself have been involved in cannabis cultivation for over 40 years. So apparently I've been an outlaw for most of my life. The idea that criminality is a component of cannabis cultivation is one of the things that just needs to go the way of the dodo bird. It has been legalized now. There's local jurisdiction authority, so regions can choose to regulate cannabis or to not regulate cannabis or to prohibit cannabis, and that is up to the people who live there. But the broad concept that there is criminality involved with cannabis is from the past. You know, that needs to be let go of. And so does the idea that stoners are lazy and they smell bad, and they're dumb, and you know, the smoke stinks and all this other stuff. Cannabis as a consumable product, as a consumer packaged good, has superseded that stereotype also, and is presented in innumerable various ways. And I personally believe that there's an opportunity for cannabis cultivation in regions, or not cultivation, my mistake, for cannabis tourism to exist in regions who don't choose to have regulated cannabis cultivation. And there's pathways to enjoy cannabis and to combine it with tourist activities that don't require, a California Environmental Quality Act and tens of thousands of dollars in permitting fees. And that, as Dana was saying, is up to the creativity and ingenuity of the individual. And like what I see also with our work, I'm not part of the chamber, but we work a lot together. I'm coming from the perspective from my personal self as a farm that probably isn't going to really work for tourism, too far out in the hills, maybe someday. But how can I then bring my product into a setting off farm? And so I think also that the pigeonholing of cannabis tourism being regulated to or relegated to cultivators is also not accurate. Many people, like you can have a cannabis-friendly Airbnb. You know, you can do that, and it's legal. Of course, follow all your local guidelines. I'm not giving legal advice. But the stereotypes that it's dirty, that it's illegal, there's criminality, all the things that you see in the news. You don't see people like me in the news. You know, you don't see people like Dana in the news, because we don't make the news, because we're not criminals, you know. So that's my take on it. And I think that's a really, really, really important component into all of this. It's just coming to terms with what is, you know, nearly 100 years of prohibition. It's going to take a minute, but we can do it. And I think that we're missing out on a lot of the benefits until we reach that point.
Can I add something real quick, Rick?
Please.
So just to speak a little bit on the marketing side. So again, my orientation is the travel audience, right? And obviously there's an audience here that it goes beyond the typical stoner stigma audience. So it's evolving and recognizing that's important. The data shows that. From a brand strategy perspective, as the North Coast region, and as like from the California perspective, quite frankly, just want to share a little bit of information with everybody in this room to think about. One is every single Amsterdam coffee shop has a dedicated section on the menu that says Cali, C-A-L-I, and it has cannabis flowers that are from California, just the strain names, the cultivar names. California, to what Adrian said earlier, is about to take applications and start having cannabis appellations, which is ag, right? It's an opportunity to remind the world of California ag, Mediterranean climates, things like this. So as cannabis appellations, just like wine AVAs, start getting established in California, which is going to happen, I believe, in the next 6 months, looking at that as an asset to tell a terroir and a microclimate agricultural story is incredibly powerful. How do we get that appellation on those menus in Amsterdam and have marketing material, right? The second thing is the Emerald Triangle brand. It already has cachet. How do we start stewarding that as a brand asset? And not the Emerald Triangle proper, but the greater region around it, right? The entry points, all of it, the whole coast, everyone in this room. Like, these are all bordering destinations that can serve that storytelling, just like the brand Greater Palm Springs. It's Palm Springs in 8 other cities, but they positioned it with the greater nomenclature, so it speaks to bigger than just the Palm Springs area. And the third one is the brand of Weed California. So I think of, like, what is the brand strategy for this region. You guys have some amazing crown jewels. And then one of the case studies that I would encourage everyone to like look into is in the 1850s, when the World Fair was in France, they specifically invested in launching the craft wine industry through a dedicated campaign elevating the Bordeaux region. They chose one region, and with the attention of the World Fair, they launched the craft wine industry we all know today. And then Italy adopted it, Germany adopted it, now it's in California. And I can't help but think of the 2028 Olympics on the horizon. And what is this? I mean, and we have these, the Emerald Triangle region is what I would kind of raise the flag on as the opportunity. But look at the blueprint. This isn't, it's been done before with an agricultural product. So how does the region come together around this and allocate time, attention, and resources to start elevating the conversation just like France did?
Thank you. Laura, I thought, yeah.
And I just want to say one thing that I think kind of ties into what everyone is saying here. We need to have more conversations like this, and we need to focus on destigmatizing, normalizing, and educating. And that is important, and to integrate it into everyday economics. So on so many levels. That's it in a nutshell. I could say so much more, but.
Well, and I wish we did have some more time for questions, but I do know that we're going to be holding up the next speaker and everybody getting home eventually this afternoon. But I want to thank all of you for making time for today. I always learn, every time I talk to any of you, I learn more, and I think it's fascinating. I definitely fall into the can of curious mode, and I certainly haven't satiated that appetite yet. So thank you very much, and thank you all for the time.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say Rick has been a great person on our team for getting the summit ready. It's nice to have the voice from Trinity County. Even though they're not officially the state region, we bring them in because they're like us. So I am excited to introduce our next speaker. We have just fine, excellent speakers throughout the whole event. So we have a couple more to do before we all go home, but every one of them is going to be great. I want to talk just a little bit about, we've mentioned Redwood Region Rise a couple of times, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, I'm going to remind you sort of how much money it has brought into our region. So since 2023, we have received 2 state grants. The first one was called SURF. It was $5 million for convening and planning in our region, which is Humboldt, Del Norte, Mendocino, and Lake. We also, just for convening and planning, received an additional $5 million through a program called Catalyst. After those 2 convening and planning grants, we attracted a private funder, and we've received another $400,000 to work on sustainability of the regional work that we've been doing so far. So that's $10.4 million that's come into our region to do regional work. And $10 million of state funding was leveraged to get $400,000. Now, for projects specifically, Catalyst brought in $9 million. Do you know how much Los Angeles got? $9 million. We got the same amount of money. They were not happy about that. I just want you all to know. We also, before the SURF funds came out, Mendocino received $3.2 million for our implementation pilot project at the Noyo Harbor. We've received $1 million for a tribal project here in Lake County with Scott Valley Energy. And then we have leveraged that to receive another $2.5 million from a private funder. So that is an additional $15.7 million we brought to our region because of this work that we've done together. So what I want to say is regional work works. That's why we're here today, because we have started to build a really strong region, and I'm so grateful for that. Our willingness to work together helps us to attract funding that, as we are already seeing. And when we talk about what Los Angeles got versus what we got, I mean, we could stretch $1 here and make a huge impact with a lot less money. So when we're bringing in millions of dollars, that makes a real difference. So for rural communities, this is especially important, and I also like to remember that regionalism gives us a voice. Alone, we are very quiet. I think a lot about Horton Hears a Who, and there's a lot of times we're like, we're here, state people, but together we're a little louder and they can hear us a little better. And so I'm happy to introduce Egon Terplan. He is the Regionalism Fellow for California Forward. He's an expert in regionalism and economic development. He helped launch and manage Regions Rise Together, which we're going to hear about, and REAP 2.0, which some of you might be familiar with. Today he's going to talk about Regions Up, and it's what California Forward is working on, and what does that mean for our rural communities. So Egon, thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you so much for all of you to be here late on a Friday afternoon, caring so much about this region, so much about this work. I wanted to share a little bit, as was shared in the introduction, about what was some of the work that we did that led to some of those investments, but also, apologies in advance, I also wanted to step back and kind of share a little bit of thinking about maps and regions and why regionalism matters, and a little bit on the history of this in California, because I think this state has done some extraordinary things in regionalism. But a core message I want to leave you all with today is, despite that, we don't actually have a durable system. And part of what we've been able to do, actually, can everyone hear me? Is this loud enough? Okay. Better, okay, let me raise it just a little bit more. What we've been able to do is bring in some of those new investments, but we are now working on trying to make a system that lasts, that's institutionalized. So the dollars that you just heard about were one time. So part of what I'm going to kind of share with you is some of the initial thinking we've had, and then time dependent. Would love a conversation a bit with all of you about that. So just to say a word or two about myself as I jump into this. Again, Egon Terplan, been working with California Forward since I left the administration a little more than 3 years ago. I've worked on regional issues and regional planning for a number of years throughout California. Actually began my career doing regional economic development all over North America and some internationally. And it was really the fundamental idea of, like all you hear, across multiple sectors, across multiple jurisdictions, institutions, how do you come up with ideas and priorities together that you couldn't do on your own? And we took some of that thinking and came to the state and said, you know what, in California, regionalism has been effective, but it's been effective in part for the regions that had more resources. We wanted to change a mindset to say all regions have opportunities, and whenever we make a program, so you heard those dollars, the same amount for Los Angeles County as for the North Coast, as the Redwood Coast, as the North State, as the Eastern Sierra, that was critical, because of inequities that we had seen historically between regions. And one of the slides I do want to show is a little bit of that growing geographic inequities that we've had in California. Another quick kind of personal point, my grandfather spent a lot of time in the timber industry logging pre-Maxim Pacific lumber in the 1970s. And so I have a lot of family in Humboldt County and Siskiyou a little bit further inland. But so I've spent a fair bit of time. I know we're in the southern end of that region. So, next slide here. I guess I have to tell you. I'm going to share with you kind of a high level about that, but I think this sort of 4 key points I want you to really understand is this notion of, 1, regionalism is thinking beyond our geographies, beyond our towns and our counties, and what we can accomplish more together. 2, as I mentioned, this idea of the long history of regionalism in California, but one that it's really actually been grounded in managing our ecological systems. A lot of the big movements for regionalism in the San Francisco Bay Area and in Los Angeles, yes, very different urban regions, it was grounded by a sense of place around protecting an ecological asset. So I think that's actually important, because embedded in an idea I want to share a little bit about Ian McHarg and the idea of ecological regions, that I think is something that is we tried to bring into the work that we're doing, and thinking much more about the natural systems as the interconnection points. But really fundamentally, we're at this moment where we need to come up with something durable, and we're going to share with that. So next slide. Okay, so beginning a little bit with maps, sort of pulling back. Has anyone seen this image before, this map before? I don't know if you can see it I see someone in the back. This was the map that was made of California. many years ago, many centuries ago, when people came and traveled, coming up from the coast of Mexico up into California, and at some point assumed that that kind of, from Baja on the inland part, it was just going to go all the way in and there was water on the other side. Never bothered to quite make it to the other side to change the map, just assumed it would continue. So this map lingered on for centuries, mostly in Europe where this was being shared, but it led to the notion of California being an island. I think all of you who live in this region understand that, behind the Redwood curtain, this notion of kind of being a place apart, but California itself has been a place apart. And in part, I share this with you, the idea that the map shapes our mental sense of what the place is, where it begins, where it ends, how we inhabit it, how we start into it. And also, in a sense, we get the map wrong, it lays the groundwork for a bunch of other choices we may make. We can change it over time. Obviously, California is not an island. And since subsequent to that, of course, the separation of Baja California Norte, where we are now, and Sur into Mexico changed as well. But really thinking about that map is important. If we go to the kind of next one, this is, your region, as it were, kind of turned sideways, which we don't always look at it that way, but where you all see yourselves within it, what are the systems that connect us, I think becomes the question. When we did the work to set up SURF and then Jobs First, we had to draw a boundary. We had to draw a boundary, and we chose to use county boundaries. Why? Because it's easier from a jurisdictional perspective, it's easier from a financial perspective, it's easier from a data perspective. But that doesn't mean that the county boundaries follow the actual natural systems that are the true region. So I would be curious, in all of the work that you did, were there places where you actually really saw those boundaries not working out right? Because we ought to be designing a different and a different kind of ongoing system, or one that's more flexible, that really treats those natural systems moving forward. If we go to the next one here. Also embedded in the idea of regions, of course, is a sense of identity. And I don't know if any of you read the Joel Garreau book from the 1980s of the 9 nations of North America, but you can see we're a part here of a much larger region that extends on the coast all the way up into British Columbia and further north and down throughout Northern California. So is that idea of ecotopia, what does it mean? I mean, I think the panel we just heard before of kind of really thinking differently about cannabis from a regional identity might be something that would connect a number of those places, but may not be true as much in other regions that we see on this map of North America. So if we go to the next one, that idea of really understanding the state as a series of distinct regions was what led us to really say, how do we design policy that relates to that? And these are just 3 different ways of looking at it. Many of you may work sometimes with Caltrans. Many of you may have done work with climate assessment and thinking about the climate risk and different impacts. And of course, the carb pollution burden is a very important map for shaping where state dollars go. And because you're all here in a region that's largely green, fewer dollars flowed here, right? So the way the data shows linked to priorities from the state becomes a way of how resources get allocated. But go to the next one. We know that California is varied, it's diverse, it has many different landscapes. The lower right image, by the way, I think some of you from that area, that's Ferndale, not San Francisco, so I wanted to, was there just a couple years back. But that variety of California, when you sit in state government, many people are in Sacramento, and the bulk of the population, as we know, is in the South. There isn't as much of an understanding of that distinctiveness of regions. So when you all come together like this, and you're able to articulate, this is our values, this is what we stand for, and more importantly, here are the projects, here's the priorities, here's what we're trying to move, and you can come together to articulate that, that is where you can have power. When you're doing it at the scale of your cities and communities and regions, because of the population dynamic, it's always going to be hard to outcompete the other parts of the state. But when you do it as a regional voice, particularly if it's grounded in this sense of history and a broad set of people coming together, that is where you really have a lot of strength. So that idea of regionalism, right? How do we think of key issues across geographies? Obviously, air flows across county boundaries. It doesn't stop there. When the wildfires come through, they're obviously threatened. They don't respect the jurisdictional boundaries. So we have to design a system that recognizes that, but also has some level of flexibility. If we go to the next one here, then recognizing that notion of a fragmented governance system. And this is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, but I don't know if I have agreement amongst a lot of the people we work with. In other words, one of the things we've articulated is, should there be a common set of regional boundaries? In a sense, we have workforce regions and transportation regions and planning regions. Should those be more unified such that you're actually working on a consistent basis? Some people say yes, and others, it varies. Some people say, no, we actually really like to have these very distinct regions depending on what we're working on. I would put to all of you, be curious how you see about that. If you go to the next slide, because there's been some attempts to try to move these and adjust them. Community colleges have a set of regions that are 8. When we did Jobs First and SURF, there were 13. And we actually started, someone said, well, there's just going to be 10 regions in the state. And I looked at it and I said, there's no way there's only 10 regions in California. You dive into it and there's far more. The last panel, I think we heard a reference to the Coachella Valley. It's a region and a sub-regional identity, but it's not a region on the scale of being an entire economic region that received the $5 million in investment because it was a part of one county. So this is an ongoing kind of back and forth push that we think about. But again, the idea of having those consistency means you're not duplicating efforts. You're able to find a common table that you can work on together. The other thing that's important, though, and I recognize this is a rural region, and some of the thinking in regionalism has come from metropolitan areas, that idea of a commute shed. Your region's much bigger than a commute shed. And Caltrans districts are certainly bigger than individual commute sheds, but partially because of the transportation investments that we make or don't make shapes access. So if Highway 101 were a very different, much wider highway, that would shape growth patterns here. Because it isn't, because it goes down from 4 to 3 to 2 lanes ultimately, that has shaped the growth opportunities or the limitations of Mendocino County, which I think is core to the identity of this place. So one of the things that people understand is transportation can shape the direction you're going in, for better or for worse, depending on what you're trying to do. To broaden a little bit out, just to share, because I like some of the maps, and I think what was interesting here at a national level, people were saying, but where's California? Where do we have, and you see, Eureka has its kind of an economic orbit that is different from the rest of California. It pops out. And I think the identification of a new Cal Poly Technic Institute in Eureka is a recognition of that distinctiveness. Not about the power of population, but recognizing that there's a distinctiveness that can be built on. If we go through a couple of these were ways that there was a beginning of understanding. Again, this is national level work of kind of, are there these things, if we kind of go to the next one, of what people started to think of as sort of broader mega regions. And you can see there's this, if we go back one, the kind of NorCal up here, that's not the Redwood Coast region, but this is just using it analytically. Ultimately, regions have to be defined much more bottom up where you're coming from. But if we go to the next one here, this idea of mega regions across the United States is about an interconnected economic destiny with a set of potential infrastructure investments. And you can see the Redwood Coast is not part of that one because that core Bay Area to Sacramento, the Central Valley, is the nexus of it. And perhaps that's a good thing because it shapes a different path forward. If we go to the next slide here, there's a long history of some level of national identification of priorities of where to invest. And in the early 1800s, the Gallatin Plan that Thomas Jefferson had imagined led to investments in canals. And the Erie Canal is famous because it opens up throughout New York State to connect into the Great Lakes from New York City right when the railroad was starting to happen. So it kind of became something that didn't shape going forward, but it led to a thinking of how we're interconnected. And then fast forward into the 20th century, there was in 1908 an inland waterways study that was about where are we going to be putting major dams for hydroelectric power. And as you can see here in the study that eventually comes up in the 1930s, it took a couple of decades from that thinking into the New Deal when the investment flowed. You can see up here where we are and further into the north was one of those areas. But this area didn't receive the same level of investment as the Tennessee Valley Authority in the southeast, which became one of the most dominant sets of federal investments and place-based economic development in the history of this country. How successful was it is debatable, but there's a very, very strong, powerful energy-producing entity in Tennessee that comes out of that period. So that idea of thinking about where the needs are at a much bigger scale can lead to big investments, but it may not be what is wanted. If we go to the next one here, I'm positing in part that the idea of a bioregion and an ecological region, I think, is much more going to be, should be embedded in how we do the regional work. The infrastructure investments are a key part of it, but I think a mindset much more around ecology fits with the California sensibilities. And this is just happens to be the watersheds that flow into the San Francisco Bay. So again, it's not this particular region, but it's one way of mapping a geography of interconnectivity. And ultimately, there is not a regional government, there's not a regional plan at the scale of those blue lines there, but there is interconnectivity around how waters relate to each other. So moving forward, I just wanted to share that notion of an ecological region, and Ian McHarg, who wrote Design with Nature, thought about, and I think it's important if we go to the next one, of just sort of two kind of pieces of it, that again, if this is helpful in your thinking. One is thinking about the scale of your region around some of these natural systems, like watersheds, habitats, soil types. And I think that kind of grounds some of your work generally. But also that social and ecological health are inseparable. So as you're doing that work on managing the ecological system, you're simultaneously also helping with the social attributes as well. And they're intertwined, and they're not disconnected from each other. So that notion, and maybe Ian McHarg may return as a concept in some of this work going forward. But I also bring, and I've brought to this work of thinking about regions, a lot of humility in the failures and the mistakes we've made, and to share an image from Jane Jacobs, who was very well known as an urbanist, but also is very well known as a regionalist, someone that thought that when she wrote a book on the history of the United States economy, she was describing that the US economy in the 1980s looked like it was very strong. So if you were in Michigan, you would say, great, we're a part of a strong national economy. But because the indicators failed to look at GDP at a regional scale, Detroit's economy was falling apart. That this gap between thinking and national, think about the statistics we hear on the radio, often at a national level, but our lived reality is regional. Yet, in her quote, she cautions us to say that a region's an area safely larger than the last one to whose problems we found no solution. So we shouldn't say the regional approach is, well, we couldn't quite figure out how to fix this creek here, so we're going to do it at the larger scale. So the humility, I think, is important as we begin to plan work, because ultimately this is about solving problems. And it's about solving problems in a way together. So to move forward, to share a couple of kind of ideas, we know, and I think you all know, some of these core issues that need to be worked on, and you are working on, whether it's around wildfires, whether it's on business attraction and workforce development, the infrastructure deficits and finding the resources for it, economic diversification, examples of new industries that we just heard about in the last panel, and of course, the housing crisis, which is not unique to this region, but there are unique attributes to it, and the types of solutions you come up with are going to be shaped here. And go to the next one. As you think about how to work and solve regionally, a couple of examples of ways to think about it. One is, of course, sort of a service delivery regionalism. Are there ways where you're jointly contracting to arrive at a service that you don't have? And this happens a lot with wastewater treatment plants. It happens with police and fire services. You aggregate at a bigger scale to purchase something that's harder to do at a local scale. And one of the benefits of that, of course, is getting the expertise that you can buy at a bigger scale. And I know many of you are probably involved with RCRC that does some of this. Of course, the policy advocacy regionalism, which was referenced before, around how do you make your voice heard in other places, thinking about the new sectors that are growing your economy in the economic side, and then this environmental regionalism. And there's a lot of history of this, and I'll say something briefly about the Bay Area, but in Oregon, there's something we can draw from, that the Thousand Friends of Oregon was a movement in the 1970s to think about how do we maintain the viability of our agricultural lands as there was urban encroachment. And so they got a state law passed that enabled the growth of something called a regional government, particularly for the Portland region, that had the powers of growth control. At the scale of the region, there's an elected government that decides where is that regional growth boundary going to exist. Now, that may not be the right policy idea for this region. It certainly hasn't happened elsewhere in California, at an elected government level, but it shows the idea that managing an asset, managing the viability of agricultural land was the priority that led to a solution that was regional in nature. So thinking about this in California, and kind of I'm going to get to sort of where we are and what we're going with, we have this long history of regionalism. The state of California has the very first regional air district from the 1950s because of air pollution that was happening after World War II. Was air pollution the only an issue in California? Absolutely not. But it was the idea, the ability to see that and say, we actually need a solution where we are regulating what's coming out of our factories, which led to what's regulating what's coming out of our cars, which led to regulations at a state level. And some argue maybe it was too much regulation, but it started from a standpoint of solving something that was regional in nature. And of course, we also, in the San Francisco Bay Area, in this ecological, if we go to the next image here, in the San Francisco Bay, one of the big regional movements that was happening at that same time in the 50s was about saving the bay. And the bay was being thought of as something for the Army Corps of Engineers to simply put landfill in to turn it essentially into a shipping channel. And there was a movement led by the wife of Clark Kerr, the superintendent, or the chancellor of the UC system, Save the Bay movement, that ultimately led to the creation of a regional government called the Bay Conservation Development Commission that manages and plans the entire shoreline of the bay and treats it as a single, if we go to the next image, kind of what was happening here, something called the rebar plan that was, you can see that channel, that potentially fillable bay. So most of you have probably been to the San Francisco Bay. It is a wide body of water, likely to get larger from sea level rise. But I share with you that idea of that ecological asset identification as a system. Everybody individually wanted to dump their landfill to expand the boundaries of their cities, to bring the tax base in, to grow their tax base as a city. So in the individual city's interest, it was to expand your boundary, but the collective interest was losing out as part of that. So you needed to work at a scale of the region to say, okay, nobody can do this. And once nobody could do it, then everybody started to get access to that shoreline. And now there actually happens to be a bay trail all the way around the shore of the bay, almost entirely around the bay, and regulations around it. And I know there's a lot of thinking here about kind of, a bike path all the way through the former railroad line, and I don't know how much of that has been built, but that kind of thinking where individual places may give up a little bit in exchange for everybody gaining something more. And that principle, I think, is core to this. So moving forward a little bit, the other big part of regional planning in California that I do want to kind of make sure everyone's aware of is how we think about land use and transportation. And we're trying to think about them in an integrated way. But what's pretty clear about this map? What's missing? What's not listed as one of the regions? Where we are here, and the North State and the Sierra. So this is a map of each of those lines around there are called metropolitan planning organizations. They're federally designated. They get direct money from the federal government to do transportation planning. There are transportation planning agencies at the county level, of course, throughout each of the counties here, but this particular geography and the plans in California, all of those areas in red have to do a sustainable community strategy. Wouldn't you all want a sustainable community strategy that identifies where the housing goes, where the transportation investments align with that? How do you grow in a way that is responsive to the climate impacts? So we set up a system, but we left out a huge part of the state. And so that's something that we have wanted to rectify. If we go to the next slide. So when we launched Regions Rise Together, I know that you have Regions Rise here as the name of that, and I think that's an important kind of concept that all of us are collectively involved in this. When we launched this work in 2019, we wanted to make sure that all regions were a part of it. So if we kind of continue on to the next one here, and that was in part because we saw that this rising geographic inequality between coast and inland, between south and north, we were pulling apart. And I think we've continued to do so, and this is a national phenomenon. And I think we're also seeing it right now in the context of the rise of artificial intelligence, the massive investment in there. There are some potential economic shocks that are coming forward to us. And you've all lived through a massive transition with the change in the timber industry. There are parts of the state that are reliant on the oil sector that are going through transitions. So transitions are inherent, but having a path and a plan towards it that deals with the economy at the core of it, that is why we did the Community Economic Resilience Fund. And that is why we didn't want to leave out any parts of the state, and all parts were included. So if we kind of continue on here, that idea embedded in that work was we have to change the mental map of California to see every region as having value. Every region has assets to build on, and to give an investment in the process where you identify those assets, and you do a regions up approach where you identify some of the investments to come out of it, but not to forget about that there's an interconnective tissue that connects us all together. And that's, I think, where a lot of the state work can come in. So where are we now? If we go to the next slide. We did that Regions Rise Together initial work and said this was a concept, and we did some initial seed investments, particularly in the Fresno region and in the Kern region, and there were some conversations up here. We got the Community Economic Resilience Fund through that was initially $600 million. We got the Regional Early Action Planning grants through that was also $600 million, and then, of course, SURF got rebranded as Jobs First, a series of acronyms. But that program, if we go to the next slide, led to some important infrastructure that we have all across the state, including in this region. It was an incubator for a new way of doing economic development, a way of doing economic development that was both community, business, public sector, workforce, thinking with the economy. It started down that path. I think we probably didn't define as clearly as we could have all the different parts that need to be working together, but we at least created that initial piece. But that civic capacity exists in a lot of places, and we heard about the Catalyst investments, and many of you might be involved in some of those programs. We now also have a state economic blueprint. So what you're doing and what you've been working on and the projects you're working on are not in isolation. And a key part, if I can leave another sort of nugget or a message to all of you, is as we think about industries like the cannabis industry, working on it in a region is essential, as well as being able to connect to a state strategy where there's clarity of direction and investments is also critical. So the Regions Up system that I'm going to try to get to in a moment is trying to really do both of those at the same time. And this is what's under threat, because it doesn't continue necessarily beyond here. So moving on to here, we learned from this idea, though, but shifting power to regions, making investments in all parts of the regions is critical, but it's fragile because of the one-time money. So if we go to the next slide here, this is the idea of the urgency to act now. That in a year, Jobs First ends. What's also happening in a year? A governor's race, right? Or the governor's race has already begun. And the also is going to continue to be a series of climate risks, of course, facing our regions. And one of the things that's happened from that we're seeing is the amount of investment by the state just in maintaining the system because of climate impacts is going up. So Caltrans, for example, had billions to spend on rebuilding from climate impacts and wildfires last year, wildfires and floods they weren't expecting. So that means that we're increasing having climate impacts that are eating a big portion of the public sector budget in those infrastructure dollars, so we have to plan and think differently to adapt and manage. If we don't do that, the dollars we want over here to grow these sectors, to have more investment in childcare, more investment in healthcare and other needs will diminish. So how we think much more across silos is a key part of regionalism because you understand how it works in your place. Someone in Sacramento is not going to understand as well that balance between wildfire risk and flood risk and healthcare needs and school needs and all of those varieties. Those become much more localized. So we got to this notion of having every region here. The map to the right still exists. Those investments are flowing to those places, but I think we need to think much more long-term about a system where every part of the state has its own regional geography. So if we go on here, what we are trying to get to is building a system that is durable, that has this regional empowerment, and has this integrated approach across all of the different institutions. We've done some work at looking at other states, and there's a few things, and we have a white paper on the California Forward website if you want to look at it that draws a few lessons from a few states. On the next slide here, just mentioning those, New York has something called economic councils. Every part of New York State is in an economic council. That economic council is public-private, they get resources, and if you're part of that plan, and you want to get access to some state dollars, you say, well, we're project 17 on the Finger Lakes Regional Plan. There's $8 billion that's flowed through that planning process to the priorities identified by regions. This is over 10 years. There's a downtown revitalization initiative for a downtown Eureka or Arcata or any other community. The regions get to identify a downtown to go after some of those dollars. So they have a system that is ongoing. That's why I say back to 2011. What we have in California are some programs that are going to end. So if we go on to the next idea, wanted to share just that the circular economy, I think, is something we can bring into this as we look at opportunity, and then I'm going to close with what some of the policy ideas are. So I wanted to mention about the circular economy because it ties back to this idea of ecological regions, and it ties back to a different way of thinking. And if we think about how the fossil fuel economy in California was some places had extraction, but it got used everywhere. The idea of the bioeconomy, the circular bioeconomy, is every place has biomass and waste streams that we can use to generate new economic value and a whole different supply chain. So this is one of those kinds of thinking, and there's a lot of work in this. I think there are elements of certainly about timber and biomass was a core part of one of your priority industries, but there's a lot of work here in the Sierra as well as in the Central Valley. So just this notion, if we go to the next slide here, of course, the biomass is varied across regions. And we share this, and we had a big conference about this at Stanislaus State a couple of days ago in Turlock, really thinking through what is a state roadmap that tries to unlock biomass in a way that's circular, i.e. drawing waste streams, not importing corn from Iowa to put into a factory to make ethanol, but using what we have locally, recognizing the distinctiveness of the biomass in each place, and then potentially, of course, creating significant amount of employment coming out of that. So a more regenerative system, but a system that draws from what we have. A lot of optimism here, and a lot of potential technological breakthroughs. Because if the ability to convert that biomass into a product, into the plastics and the chemicals and the fuels and the alternative proteins becomes as cheap or cheaper than fossil fuels, suddenly it's going to unlock economic opportunity everywhere. So I think there's a few things on the horizon, many things that I think give us hope, and this is one of those. So to get to the kind of sort of not punchline, but the idea of kind of what are we trying to do through California Forward, we are trying to imagine a durable regional system where the regions all have a sense of how they work within themselves, how they coordinate with the state, how they communicate with the state, and what kind of investment is flowing back and forth. So I'm going to close with a few thoughts on that, and then I assume we have some time maybe for conversation or question about that, because we are thinking about this, but we are trying to think about this and balance this, recognizing that every part of California is so different. And the challenge when you do policy design is we got to every place gets money, the same amount of money, but we didn't get to how it should work in every place, because you don't want to be too prescriptive. So kind of moving forward through some of this, we launched this. How many people here were at the California Economic Summit? Okay, so a few of you here. So California Forward is a statewide organization really focused on inclusive and sustainable economies, very grounded in the regions and the distinctiveness of the regions, and is partnered with the California Stewardship Network, which has many organizations, some in the region, and my colleague Ish Herrera is here, who's the executive director of CSN. Those organizations, those civic groups, are doing the work on the ground in communities to really try to understand how to kind of do this work and carry it out. And so partnered with us to have this conversation over a couple of sessions, hundreds of people digging into this work. And a couple of things that came out of that, if we go into the next one, we're trying to build this sort of next era. We're trying to build something that lasts beyond 2026. Frankly, we're trying to build something that lasts 10 years or 15. That map I showed that left out rural areas, that's a map that goes back 18 years. So when you put something on a map, you create a program, you create a requirement to do things, you put money behind it, it can last for a long time. So we're at this very interesting moment where we can design something that might last for the next generation. But we got to do it right, and we got to do it recognizing this distinctiveness, and that's the idea of regions up. Not state down, not top down, but the regions, but not every single region entirely on its own, inventing it on its own. because that's going to be too fragmented. And then we can't connect back to state priority sectors, state investment patterns. So that balancing act is really what we're getting at for something that's durable. So there's a few outcomes we're trying to get to as part of this. Too much for here, and we can share some of the writing on this, but the idea that all regions are investment ready, that you've identified what are your needs. What's the hospital facility need in which part of your region? Where the roads need particular new investment? What types of industries you're trying to stand up? What kind of a facility could you have to take the biomass out in what community? And as that community work to identify where the land is and the sewer needs to stand that up, okay, if not, maybe they need a pilot grant to put the electricity in or the sewer in to make that happen. That idea of being investment ready is some of the basis of doing this long-term work, but we don't want it to be one-off, right? We want it to be ongoing. We want to be able to think about economic development and planning together, where we live, how we get around with what the jobs are. And economic development and workforce, what the jobs are, how much they pay, how people get trained to move into those. Right now, each of those is its own independent system. How do we kind of think much more together across those and have this consistency in funding, to have the ability to learn how to commingle money from federal government, from philanthropy and different sources. And of course, to do so in a way that creates good jobs with inclusion and prepares us for climate impacts. So that's the outcome everywhere, right? So a couple of things quickly to share on that, and then I will close. These are sort of the four categories of things, and this wanted to get to this because simultaneously we are trying to think about what would we want out of a state economic development agency, entity, system. Many of you may have been, or some of you may have been, when the state came up, the Jobs First Council came to Eureka. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. The Strategic Growth Council was having a meeting. That is a state institution, or it's a kind of a bunch of the state agencies sit together and think about the economy, but it's not in statute. It's not going to continue unless it's a priority we want to see continue. Similarly, we're trying to think, is there something parallel that should happen in each region? What would an economic council in this region look like? Who would be on it? Who would decide? Would they try to coordinate across the different plans that happen here in transportation and housing and health and education? Is that too difficult, or do they need to just focus on a couple of things? Consistent set of training priorities in workforce across community colleges and K-12 with some relationship to a few investments and some priority projects. That level of coordination has to be determined by each region, but one of the ideas we are hearing about is maybe there should be an economic council in each region with some money behind it, with some ongoing investment to continue to do this work. Then do we need new tools? There used to be redevelopment, then there's no redevelopment. This is the system of tax increment financing that we had before, that the schools weren't getting the portion of the money. But is there something else that we can use to try to unlock value, to try to unlock opportunity? Come through Lakeport, you can see places where investment could happen, but we don't always have the tools to aggregate resources to do that, to bring that value in. So that's at the kind of tools and funding level. And then how do regions communicate their needs to the state? Should every region have a seat on some state board? Should we require state secretaries to come and attend, events like this or other events on a consistent basis? Do you feel like you have voice in coordinating with other parts of California with shared issues around forestry, around healthcare investment, around broadband, or you name it, whatever those issues are? So that's another piece of it we're trying to think through. So we can just kind of go through these, but I mean, the initial conclusion we're getting at is we have to come up with some kind of an institutionalized structure. And we really want to over the next year, because it would be great if we can get the legislature to define some of the components of this system they want to see, so that a new governor comes in and doesn't say, all right, well, I've got a totally new idea. It's not regions, it's priority sectors, or it's not this, it's that. We're going to go towards space, or we're going to orient in a different way. We have done this before in California every generation or so. And we feel that we're on the cusp of something. And you're all testament to a part of that, a part of the state that's doing this really difficult regional work. But it's hard. It takes time. You got to travel long distances. You got to deal with the differences in perspective across these various silos. And we want to see a state that continues to see this as a priority. So we're going to need your help in sharing the importance of this with the legislature and then ultimately with the next governor, whom we don't know, of course, yet who that will be. So just, we can sort of go through these kind of next ones. So that's the coordination within regions piece is one of them that I talked about. We can go to the next one. There's the idea of coordination within the state government. What does a state economic development entity look like? Is it a new agency? Is it GOBIZ with a different set of authorities? What would be a priority? What kinds of tools and incentives? And then finally, what's this ongoing kind of state to regional structure? So those are the sort of 4 topics. We're getting a bunch of feedback on it. And if we have time for questions, we're going to love to share with you. That was, again, some of the folks that we had in Stockton for the meeting. And to kind of close, I think we have one more piece here, that our strength as a state has always come from the distinctiveness of our regions. This is the 4th biggest economy of the world, as is often pointed out, but it's because of that variety of the regions. But a lot of that, when you just look at GDP numbers, it misses the benefits and the assets from the regions. So the region we're in here has tremendous amount of wood and biomass and tourism attributes and clean air benefits and water. Those don't get quantified in the same way in the GDP numbers. So recognizing that distinctiveness of place is part of what we haven't done and need to do more so to build on that. So we are at a moment of excitement. We are at a moment also, though, of potential end to a system that we haven't quite delivered. So what we are trying to do is build something durable, and we really want to do it with all of you. And so with that, I'd love to take questions or critiques or any comments. So thank you very much for having me here.
Right over here. Nicole made the mistake of standing next to me with a microphone. So I will say I've been in this field in career long enough that the next governor will be the 7th governor in my career. And I can tell you the swings are amazing. So I absolutely agree 100% that this needs to be codified and baked into legislation somehow so there's a level of permanence. Yes. Thank you. That wasn't an applause line, but I'll take it. I have some concerns, however, in some of the language we're hearing, and I've expressed this to Ish and others at Cal Forward. And Stuart Knox, I said some of this too. I may be the only one in this room from a rural area that really gets the hair to stand up on the back of my neck when I hear us bragging about being the 4th or 5th largest economy in the world, because that is really 3 or 4 counties driving that. And so I hear that as a bragging point from the state, and I feel a little bit like the kid on the street looking in through the windows of the Upper East or West Side mansions at the Gilded Age, and we are not being considered when that's said. We are left out of that. So I would encourage you and everybody, and the state especially, quit bragging to this crowd about that, because it doesn't work, at least for me. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
One other point, and then I'm going to shut up.
Point taken.
Okay, one other point, and I'm going to shut up. We changed to California Jobs First. It's about people, not jobs. And so we use that language a lot about jobs, the GDP contributions of our regions and all that. That's not important to me. And again, I'm only speaking to myself. The fact that California Jobs First puts, and even on the slide, it was kind of vague and down at the bottom, those anchor sectors, those should be at the top. If we aren't talking about healthcare and housing and everything else, all the rest is not going to matter to our regions. And so I would love to see that elevated. For us in rural California, housing, deteriorated infrastructure, hunger, poverty, healthcare, those should be the leading edge of what we're talking about, because ultimately the reason what I do, and I think what all of us do, is to help people on the ground. And so I would hope that when we start moving forward in legislative language and legislative intent and talking about the vision of this, we really start focusing on that. I have small communities up where I live that can't even flush the toilets, basically. And so we're missing the point. We really missed the point when we went to California Jobs First. What? It's about people, not jobs. Jobs are things, right? So anyway, But I absolutely love what you're saying. I've been a regional guy since all the way back to Irvine Foundation and all that, and it's absolutely got to happen. But I think we just need to be careful, especially when we're talking in these regions, about our words.
Okay, I very much can just real quick response. Super appreciate you. Please always call us out on that. And the fourth biggest economy. Maybe I've heard the governor say it so much it just is in the head and it comes out. I think part of what you're describing though of the issue of healthcare, housing, food access, kind of fundamental issues, is a tension point in the idea of economic development writ large. In other words, if you take too much of a priority sector approach, a lot of regions say, we need some basic infrastructure investments before we can even prepare ourselves to imagine to be part of a new bioindustrial innovation campus facility. And so one of the thoughts I have in part is this: if we think about core planning issues with core economic development issues together, then we might have a better way to articulate what some of those needs are. That the state community development that used to be part of the housing agency is kind of been lost, right? There's a new housing agency being created, the community development part of it, and I saw the chair of that committee last night. They haven't seen a community development bill in years. So it's all about housing, which we need, but community development is what pays for some of the water sewer infrastructure to fix some of the water issues you're getting at. So I would encourage, help us collectively tell this story in a way that brings those pieces together. Sorry, yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
So can I add to Greg's comment? And one of the things, Santa Claus is what I affectionately call him. So as an economic development coordinator person, Chamber of Commerce person, I would love from your point of view to recognize or bring into your conversations that when you talk about adding jobs to our economy, what we're hearing from business owners is that that's a huge step that just kind of gets blown right over. Like, it's as if you're just like dumping an ingredient into a bowl when we're talking about it at the state level. But when you're talking to business owners, you're literally becoming responsible for your neighbor's income and household. Like, they feel ownership over the fact that they're adding a job to their payroll and they're suddenly bringing that responsibility in-house. And so it's really easy for us to talk about this at a policy level, but when we're talking about it at our level, it can be a huge risk and a huge investment, and if it doesn't work, that's our neighbor, right? So for us, when it's sort of blown over at the higher levels, when we just say, oh, we're gonna add jobs, the meaning and the heart of it is lost. And so I'm just adding to Greg's comment because that's really where we're seeing it from. And when we come back and we're like, we're going to add jobs, and our business owners look at us like, and how? No, yeah, we're supposed to add the jobs, but we don't have the revenue to do that yet, right? So, okay, I'll stop.
I think it's a very important point, and I think in all of this is why having regional voice in the policy making and building that. I mean, I know I'm speaking at a kind of policy high level, but how do you have yourselves or others show up when that policy is being made and say, okay, here's a very specific thing we're dealing with. How is that going to live in the policy that you're creating?
And we appreciate you being here to hear this from us. So don't think that we're feeling like you're not representing us, but this is just the messages that we want you to take back to your colleagues.
This is incredibly important. I hope someone's taking notes from all this in case I don't remember.
Well, we're videoing it, so it'll live.
Okay, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm probably going to keep piggybacking off all the stuff we're already saying, which is, I mean, I came up, it is mind-blowing to me growing up in this region and also realizing that currently we are about 100 miles north of the single largest concentration of capital and investment on the globe. And then we operate in this extremely rural environment, which is, I mean, again, according to every metric that the state comes up with, disadvantaged, disenfranchised. And I think to get like what Greg was saying there too. I mean, like what did William Gibson say? The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think that really, we asked like what I want out of a state regional system. And again, it's that parity, right? I come out of the arts, and we talk about the California Arts Council is one of the only ways, the only mechanisms for ensuring that there is actual funding going towards rural arts organizations, because all of the private money, whether that's actual investment or particularly foundation money, it all goes into the metropolitan parts of the state. Capital and money just follows money. So again, those state agencies are really one of the only ways of actually leveling the playing field at all on a per capita basis. And when those agencies start getting cut, which the CAC constantly does, for example, that affects us first and foremost. And also, we send, even then, we end up struggling. Like, for the longest time on the California Arts Council, we couldn't get anyone on the Arts Council that was north of Sacramento. So, yeah, I guess adding on to all of that, like state regional system, man, like yes, absolutely, because it is so incredibly vital for our voice to be heard in Sacramento.
Those are excellent points. Are there a set of principles that ought to go into some of these policy ideas? Like, for example, every region for a planning process gets the same amount. Now, we heard the tension with Los Angeles, 10 million people in Los Angeles County, right? And so they would argue from a per capita basis, they're being disadvantaged by that. Obviously, there's tons of variety of resources, but that is one concept that we embedded into SURF before it was Jobs First, that every region got the same amount for planning. So that's one thought. The other one, and this is a statistic I saw a couple of years ago, I don't know if it's changed, that 50% of the dollars from philanthropy in California are spent in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is not even a quarter of the state. It's close to a quarter. But there's a level, and so that means many, many other parts of California are being disadvantaged by those types of investments. So I think your point about state agencies, and we didn't get to this, but how could state agencies actually be more regionalized? One of the things we learned from North Carolina is they have regional staff embedded in every single region. In an office, there's 4, 5, 6, 7 agencies that all sit together. I don't know if any of that happens here. There's Caltrans used to, okay. So is that something that, would that benefit a little bit of some people, and so long as those people have access to power, and decision making, right? If they're just isolated and they don't know the levers to pull, it's not going to be as effective. But that's a piece of it. Yeah. Oh.
Hi. Thank you. I really appreciate what you're all speaking to, and that's what I wanted to talk about. I'm going to take it down to kind of the bare root situation. We don't have a taxpayer base in rural regions. Urban regions have the taxpayer base. And so how, as we look at these regions, can we somehow bring more equity into that situation? Even here in our region, Sonoma County has a taxpayer rate or base that's far superior to here in Lake County and Mendocino County. And then ours is better than, say, Shasta County or Siskiyou County. So how do we really look at this from a taxpayer base? Because honestly, from my perspective and my experience up at the state capitol, it's the taxpayer base rate that kind of drives things. So I really hope you'll include that in the discussions and really looking at, well, how are these regions equitable? Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's incredibly important, and one that, as you all know, in California, a big piece that the property tax is something that was obviously changed in the 70s with Prop 13, but actually removed the ability for local jurisdictions to change it. So there's this notion that Prop 13 was about local control. It actually meant the control is at the state for what the rate is. But I think also attention in all of this is frankly growth, though, because it's when people do a remodel and build a new unit that you will both the kind of underlying land price, the tax rate will go up again, right? Because it gets reassessed. So rate of growth has a huge impact on the growth of the tax base, because there aren't that many mechanisms unless we get into what you've been raising, which is much more about ensuring equity in the redistribution of funds that are generated statewide. But this has to be core to it, especially in a climate where the investment from the federal government has been declining and is likely going to decline for the foreseeable future. So I think it actually puts much more onus on all of us.
Egon,
Yes.
one thing we talked about when we were first discussing things is I was asking, where do rural communities hold power or leverage? And you were talking about our natural resources. So maybe you can share a little bit about where we do have strengths that maybe we're not taking advantage of.
Yeah, no, so this is a critical, and that's why I threw a little bit in about the circular bioeconomy, one thing, but we would articulate this a bunch when we were in Sacramento. Yes, the population base may be in Southern California, but the natural resources exist in all these places. If you want clean water, if you want clean air, if you want natural forest, if you want places for recreation, a lot of people are coming to these environments, those are in the rural areas. So they may not have the political base from the number of people, but they have other assets. So some of it is changing the mindset. And so that is not a political answer but that's a continual ongoing need. And if you look at other parts of the world, in France, there's tremendous power that continues in investment in the farm system. So there are ways of building into a tax system and a structure that recognizes that. And there's a lot of interest in the Sierra Nevada and other things of paying for the management of those services, ecosystem services as a potential tool. If there are carbon markets that emerge, the investment in maintaining that. And then I also think what we hope is going to happen with the bioeconomy, this idea that there are biomass resources in every part of the state that can be unlocked to create value. If that is done right, that is actually going to disproportionately benefit rural areas. If it's true, now it's still a ways away, if it is true, it's a transformation of the fossil fuel economy into a different economy. It will mean some industrial activity, but it might be an industrial activity. So those are a couple of things, but I think I would also look to all of you for ongoing help with that. But I know there's another question, so go ahead.
Hi, Eric Hart from Mendocino County. You actually just started to answer the question and say the same thing, but what I'm curious about is we've spent 2 days talking about everything that Northern California has, and you just brought up the concern about that LA might have and saying, okay, well, what about this fair share? We've got such a huge portion of the population, and then you're also saying, okay, we're number 4, or 4th or 5th economy. That means that we're not number 1. So what happens when you start investing in all these areas that don't have that representation, that have all these resources and all these opportunities? Number 4 is not good enough for California. So we can do much better than that, and I know Newsom loves that number 4 number. He says it a lot. But when you start investing in all these other areas that are getting ignored, then we have such potential that then feeds back, because when these other areas start making money and raising the GDP of California, that benefits California as a whole. So there's an argument there to be made for exactly what they did, which is the equal distribution of support for the economic development. And so hopefully you take that back. But is that the direction that they're going as well? Do they understand that? Are they looking to these other areas that have been, they look at them as disadvantaged, but also look at them as opportunities versus a drag on the economy?
Well, absolutely. That is what we tried to do when we launched this work. And that's why when I got back to the kind of regions rise together, the initial frame of it, it was seeing assets in every region and the idea of the mental map, that there are these opportunities in every place. So absolutely yes. And that is also why it's critical that as the regions articulate their sets of needs, that I understand this is where it all gets very difficult. We do need to see economic growth if we want to have some of the outcomes that you're getting at, but the prerequisite for that might be some of these investments in basic healthcare, and I'm going back to some of those components as you've mentioned before. So being able to articulate that to those that invest in those resources to say, we want to be a part of it, you can unlock economic opportunity that will reduce some of that geographic inequality, that will mean that these regions are better able to stand on their own, but they need some of this early investment to make these other pieces work, to unlock that investment that exists out there. And that's the other piece I didn't mention. There's a lot of investment capital that's looking for projects that want to go in that might be long-term investments, not short-term. Less extraction, more regenerative, more long-term. And being able to articulate that is key. So I can't say that the next governor will do that because we don't know, but I believe that we collectively should be articulating that. Every part of the state has tremendous opportunities and should be. And frankly, this is also a way to reduce the inequality that has grown. This is one of the most unequal places, certainly in the United States, in part because of that. I know there's one, oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to thank you for mentioning, of course, as far as leveraging our success and in natural resources. And that also got me thinking a couple things. First off, I mean, whenever I hear that said, I always think of the word sovereign wealth, right? That always has to be brought back and centered into it. And particularly up here, it's tribal sovereign wealth. And I think that I center that because I feel it is often very easy to think like, oh yeah, we'll go in and we'll develop this. And maybe we'll do some community benefit agreement. And there'll be some like one-time concession that'll happen to tribes or small communities in that area. Meanwhile, the corporate interests will then be making returns, profits year after year after decade. So I think that there's a kind of a reframing that we really need to revisit there seriously, but also in terms of not just being like, oh, well, how do we take our power back from those people down in LA, right? There's a huge population down there. There's a lot of people getting very, very rich off of the human capital in those metropolitan regions, right? A lot of those folks, those 10 million people down in LA are not doing well for themselves. But that's because, again, people are benefiting off of the sovereign wealth there, the sweat of their brow. So I think we really just need to have some real, I don't know, I think we just have to, across all different regions, we can recognize that together we are all having to struggle with the issues of how are we getting fair compensation for the resources, whether those are natural resources or human resources that are being extracted from our communities.
Well, I think you articulated very, very well one of the strengths you get to by working regionally. By working regionally within your particular geography of maybe there's a vision for standing up community ownership of some kind of set of new facilities with dollars that flow back to the community itself. The Green Bay Packers, the football team's owned locally. I mean, there are many, many models that are out there, and I'm sure there's some local kind of cooperative models. If you go to the Basque Country in Spain, there's an entire network of companies. The Mondragon Initiative, it is actually one of the wealthiest corporations in the world, owned by the humans that are there, in timber, in manufacturing. Beautiful areas that are not radically dissimilar from here. Maybe a few more apartment buildings because the Spanish, slightly kind of smaller town organizations, but they have a viable timber industry with value-added products owned locally. So there are models that are there that take capital to get going and also shared learning across the state. So part of this is, these are all but this is the work, I hope, I think collectively we're trying to do. So I don't know if there are any other questions or... I'm mindful of time, so I'm at your disposal, Susan.
We're actually waiting for your next speaker, so we've been trying to give
I see.
everybody
So
plenty of
continue
time.
yes,
You're the
okay.
one person who...
I mean, you can keep throwing, okay. Or you can take a
Give
break.
Greg the microphone back.
Yes. Oh, yay, we have a question.
Oh, good.
Sorry, I can't help myself, Egon. I just want to say that I do hope there's a course correction with the economic blueprint, going back to what Greg said. I think those categories really don't work for our rural area, for our region. Dr. Eiler talked about workforce development in the healthcare industry specifically in our region. I think I just want to harp on that. That blueprint it's a blueprint for certain parts of our state, but not for our region.
I appreciate that. We've heard that quite a bit. I mean, for the record, we were not involved with the blueprint at all as California. That came after we had left the state government. But I think we've heard that regions did not feel like their voices were represented in it. It wasn't built kind of regions up. And that's in part having a system it's really identifying that distinctiveness of each of the regions. So I... I appreciate it, exactly. We will carry this back, and we have conversations ongoing with the governor's office. So Thank you all very much for the time you've spent here and for your ongoing work, and look forward to partnership.
Thank you.
All that good information. Wow. Okay. We are going to hear from Cecilia Aguiar Curry, who was elected to the California legislature in 2016. She represents Lake, Yolo, Colusa, Napa counties, and a little piece of Sonoma County. Get that down. Thank you. All right. Cecilia is a walnut farmer and a small business owner, and she served as planning commissioner, city council member, and the first female mayor of her hometown of Winters in Yolo County. So prior to being elected Assembly Majority Leader, she served as Assembly Speaker Pro Tem. Her legislative agenda is focused on reproductive health care services, rural health care and broadband, wildfire prevention, agriculture, and affordable care. So Lake County is especially grateful to Cecilia this year for securing $13.6 million. Yeah? To fund projects approved by the Blue Ribbon Committee for the rehabilitation of Clear Lake. So these funds are going to help continue and expand and implement programs with funding coming through the California Natural Resources Agency. Cecilia created the Blue Ribbon Committee, and it's been functioning since 2018. And if you want to look up all the details, it's AB 707, which happens to be our area code, so that's real easy to remember for this region. So she was also instrumental, as many of you probably know, in helping create the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, and we're very happy with all of the leadership. Yay. So no further ado, I'm going to have Cecilia tell you some of the things that she's working on and what's going on with her in the California legislature.
Hi, everyone. How are you? I was running around this afternoon, had a great experience going to see the Middletown high school students. And they're so interested in what's going on in the world and in the county. So I was running a little bit late, so I apologize not for chit-chatting with you way before this. But when you have 18-year-olds, 17 and 18-year-olds want to take a picture with you, want to find out what you're doing, I thought it was really important to hang out for a little bit. So I just want to say thank you very much for having me here. It's good to be here with all of you as we close out the 4th annual Redwood Coast Regional Economic Summit. So congratulations to all of you. I want to thank all the people that made this happen, the local leaders, business owners, our farmers, tribal partners, educators, and all of you who care so deeply about the future of our rural communities. And I say that from the bottom of my heart because I think we forget about our rural communities. I don't, but I see more and more of my colleagues that are in the legislature are really caring about rural communities, and the conversations are really great in the past couple of years. We've all proven that when we roll up our sleeves, we share ideas, and stay rooted in what makes our region special, we can grow a stronger economy together. And you know, when we talk about harvesting growth, it's not just a theme. Here it is a way of life. It takes care, it takes patience, it takes thoughtful stewardship, and the same things that make a good harvest. So throughout the summit, we've heard that there's been conversations about how we can grow our downtown areas again, how agritourism and outdoor recreation can bring people back to our small towns, and how entrepreneurs can grow new life in our local economies. And I want to just make a comment to that because I came from Winters, a small town, and I was on the city council and a mayor, and there's nothing worse than to watch your little town fall apart. And you think to yourself, how can I make it vibrant? And first one is having leadership, having people that cared about your community and took the time to figure out how to make it vibrant. And I don't know if any of you have been over to Winters lately or ever, but we have a very vibrant little community now. It is on the radar. People say, I can't wait to go there. We added two hotels. We added a PG&E training center. We restored a creek that runs right down through Winters. We've added wineries, small businesses. A lot of our young people who went away to college came back and they started businesses. We taught the new businesses how to paint the outside of their buildings 3 colors so that it popped when someone walked by. Instead of just walking by a small business, we want you to look at the business. We told our retailers, put all your product up by the window so that people don't have to look into it. So there's a lot of things that we had done in the past, and it was because we wanted to promote ag tourism, we wanted to promote the economy, and I think every community can do this if they have the will and they have the leadership to do so. So I just wanted to pop my little piece in because I'll never forget when we started, we had nothing, and people told me I couldn't do it, and told my city manager we couldn't do it, and we said, we'll prove you wrong, and we did. So this year in the legislature, as I do every year, I've been working to make sure our state's priorities and our bills and my policies actually work for rural California. And I have a rule in my office, and Laura's here somewhere, but we all know it. When I do policy, I say, what's the problem? How do you fix it? But the most important thing is how do you implement it? And if you can't implement it, then you should start from scratch and start over. I'm not someone that wants my picture on the front page of the paper. I want people to know that I got the work done and we did it behind the scenes and we changed people's lives. So I've stayed in contact all along and focused on the health of Clear Lake because we all know that the lake is the heart of our county. If the lake isn't healthy, our economy here isn't healthy. So we built off of AB 707 from 2017, the creation of the Blue Ribbon Committee for Rehabilitation of Clear Lake, which brought science, collaboration, state resources together to make the lake and our local economy healthy. We've been able to secure $74 million for Clear Lake projects, even in a tough budget year. And I started that, thank you. We started that work in 2016 when I first got elected, and I promised the people of Lake County that I would never give up. Because this is a difficult area. It's difficult when you don't have a lake that's healthy. It's difficult to convince people to do economic development here. And since we invested that money, we have seen so many things change. We've seen people wanting to make sure our roads are fixed. We want to make sure that we have our healthcare clinics are working. We want to make sure there's streeting and lighting that's working. So there's a lot of good that has come out of that $74 million. Of that $74 million, it includes $15.4 million in next year's budget, $1.8 million from the $20 million we were able to secure from Proposition 4, and the rest of the money is ready to go as new rehabilitation projects are identified in future years. And those dollars are already working for us. From the Middle Creek restoration project to the oxygenation project that we're doing, a pilot program out in the lake, and voluntary water conservation efforts from our ag community that helped us protect the Clear Lake hitch. And all of that couldn't have been possible without the partnership of our tribal communities, our UC Davis scientists, the Board of Supervisors, our state agencies, and our local experts, and you, our community members, who live and breathe in this community every day. So Clear Lake's health challenges didn't appear overnight, and they won't be fixed overnight. So technically, I have 3 more years as being an assemblywoman. I still have 1 more round to vote next November. But I'm not going to give up because we need to continue investing in this county. And it's going to take, again, some time. And we've seen some great progress in the lake, and we're identifying some of the issues that are here. But like I said, it's not going to happen overnight. And we're in this for the long haul. But the good news is that we have the framework, the right people at the table, and some real funding momentum. So in addition to Clear Lake, it's been a year of affordable housing solutions in the legislature, including housing and infrastructure reforms like the CEQA regulations that streamline environmental review to speed up housing and infrastructure projects, expedite permitting and approve processes, and stabilize costs by freezing new residential building standards through 2031. With all this good work done this year, we still have a lot more to do, as you can imagine, including making sure the process of protecting tribal cultural resources that makes sure that the tribes are at the table. And the vision of all this work, and I think it's what brings us here to a summit today, is healthy environments, thriving downtowns, strong farms and ranches, vibrant tribal and rural communities where our kids and our grandkids can stay and work and raise their families. So as we all head home later today from this summit, I want to keep the energy going. I think it's really important that we talk to each other, that we network with each other. Let's keep building the partnerships that make rural California thrive. Bring in the young people. You know, today we visited with Middle Creek, and a young man said, "Oh, I'm glad you're working on the lake." And we basically said, "Do you want to help?" And it didn't dawn on him that maybe he could help. And Laura gave him a suggestion that maybe working with some of the tribal people are doing some restoration projects. Get your hands dirty, see what's going on. You never know what doors you're going to open for these young people. So we've proven that when rural communities speak with one voice, the state will listen. Thank you for all the work you have done today and every day. It's the businesses, your farms, your classrooms, and in your communities. I do want to say something that's, I think, really important that you know, why I'm so proud of the Blue Ribbon Committee and how I got $74 million plus. I did it because when we did the committee, they put their heart and soul into it. And I'm not going to lie, our first year was rough. Not everybody wanted to sit at the table together, but we persevered and we did it. And to do that, I said to my speaker, and I told legislative leadership, that I needed that funding to continue to come into Lake County. And the Blue Ribbon came and listened, and every single year, like clockwork, in June, July, they show up with a comprehensive report of what they have done, where the money's been spent, what their next steps are going to be. And I can easily walk into the budget chairman, even when we've had a bad year this year with the legislature and with budgeting, I could walk in and proudly say, we have a problem, and we fixed it, and we implemented it. Here's what we've implemented so far, and they never even blinked once for me to get the funding for Lake County. And that to me meant so much, is that the committee came together and has never let me down or my colleagues down. So I want to thank all of those that were involved with that. So, I want to just thank you again for all the work you've done. I'm proud to represent you. I love my job every single day. I can't wait to work in this whole district. And is it difficult sometimes? Absolutely. Is there challenges? Absolutely. But there's so much joy that we get out of seeing everyone's faces, and they tell me a story of what they're doing in their community, how they're changing things, and educating me along the way. So let's keep harvesting the growth here, season after season, and I want to thank all of you. Thank you for putting this together. It's very important, and have a safe trip home as well.
is the gem of our community. This used to be, like Ron was talking about, this was the school's property for quite some time. Natural High was here until we demolished it over there and got $5.8 million of Prop 68 money. Entirely because of being able to get the community involved in it.